Upon seeing the lich, Tao couldn't believe what her eyes were seeing. She checks up on Robert, who is pretty confused about what the big skeleton monster's deal is. He asks Tao to tell him what exactly a lich is, but then Tao is scared Robert would want to fight the lich, which she thinks would be dangerous for him. In a bid to protect the man, she uses her key powers to push him out of the room at a high speed. Once he's gone, she then turns and faces the terrible lich monster, cursing at her bad luck for meeting such a high-level monster in a room that was supposed to be danger-free. Thank goodness she sent Robert out of harm's way, so there's nothing she should be afraid of again at this point. The lich begins attacking her, and Tao dodges it gracefully. In the meantime, Robert keeps on flying further away from the room where the lich is. He thinks about Tao's reason for doing such a thing, and realizes that she must want him away from there for a reason. Maybe that was why she sent him flying. Well, Robert, aka Lloyd, cushions his fall with a magic barrier, and manages to stop himself from crashing into a rock or something. Then, he phones Grimm, who's still in his palm, to find out what he thinks about the entire thing. To his dismay, however, Grimm wasn't available as Silpha caught him and punished him. Lloyd is pretty scared about what might be happening to Grimm at the moment, but then again, he worries about the only person that's in real danger at present, which is Tao. On the other hand, Tao manages to stop the fight between herself and the lich. She tried stepping back to safety, but then the impossible happened, and the lich spoke. Tao freezes in her tracks when she hears the lich talk bad about her foreign abilities and tells her that he's eaten someone with her abilities before. To crown it all up, he insults her further by telling her that he's never going to waste his time eating her at all. Robert, on the other hand, seemed like a meal to look out for since he was able to react to his magic in such a short time. Tao gets understandably pissed at the lich for insulting her powers, and then talks down on him. She lets the lich know that he and Robert are miles apart from being alike. While Robert is likable, this lich is an asshole who needs to die that instant. The lich lets her know that he doesn't give a flying shit about what she feels. This was the final nail in the coffin for Tao, as she amps up her powers to the max and kicks the living shit out of the lich's barrier, which he brought up. After getting hit so many times, she breaks the barrier and exhausts all her chi in one attack. Now that she couldn't move anymore, she was vulnerable to getting backshots from the drooling lich. The lich spends some of his time staring and tells her she ain't worth anything he should waste his time on. He sought refuge on the ceiling where he hid from her attacks. Now that he's got her in a dangerous position, he could do whatever he wanted to her. He charges up his power and fires a complex spell attack at Tao. Lucky for her, Robert or Lloyd came back to the room in the nick of time to create a barrier that breaks off the lich's spell into pieces. He then reveals himself to the lich and promises the lich to give him a fight that'll be worth his time. With this, both he and the lich blurt out a bunch of attack spells. Lloyd finishes his incantations on time and jumps back at the speed of light to protect Tao from the attack, and also grant himself a free range of motion to take down the big-headed skeleton. The lich, who couldn't trace his movements, was shocked at Lloyd's reaction time. As such, he finds Lloyd breathing weirdly and continues attacking him. Robert buys himself some time by enclosing himself in a barrier strong enough to withstand a bunch of lich's attacks. Meanwhile, he keeps trying his best to get the best breathing techniques to accumulate enough ki to become strong enough to merge both ki and mana. After breathing for several minutes on end, Lloyd destroys his barrier and grants himself more space to keep breathing. Thinking Lloyd is vulnerable, the stupid lich monster attacks him, but Lloyd keeps on drawing more air from the space around him as he dodges every attack from the terrible lich. In the end, he manages to create something new by merging both QE and mana. His first counterattack is dull and weird looking, but he takes note of that and keeps on sharpening each attack he could foster. After making several thinner air mana blades, Lloyd becomes unstoppable and a lunatic as he finally overwhelms the proud fool who thought he was stronger than the strongest mage ever. Despite every attempt to dodge such attacks from Lloyd, the lich ends up getting sliced in half by Lloyd's super secret technique, Ki Blade. Tao cannot believe how strong her man is as she smiles at him coming down. Eventually, they move on from beating the terrible lich and get down to opening the treasure chest. To their surprise, they find a dull, odd-looking knife with enchantments on the blade, and Robert takes it with him. Tao wasn't interested in it, so she let him take the knife with him. Just then, the treasure chest sinks into the ground, and the dungeon immediately starts breaking down. Rather than get the shit out of there, Lloyd goes on a rave to talk about how weird it was to have such a thing happening to them. Eventually, the duo manage to get themselves out of the dungeon in time before they get sealed in there forever. Moments later, Lloyd and Tao are safely outside the dungeon, and Tao asks him why he used ki techniques instead of mana, hoping Lloyd would tell her that he used the technique just to honor her. Tao gets the shock of her life when Lloyd tells her he only used the technique because it was fun to use. Just then, he remembers his friend, Grim, who was supposedly getting the beating of his life at home, and hops on his air jet to fly back home. Tao calls him and thanks him for saving her. Also, she lets him know that the technique he used in taking down Lich was called the Chi Blade, and even though she can't do it yet, she promises to keep on training herself till she gets the hang of it. Lloyd encourages her to keep working on herself so that she can catch up to him shortly. With that, Lloyd zooms off and finally arrives in his room. There, he finds his doppelganger, Grim, lying half dead on the floor and screams out his name. Upon waking him up, Grim tells him his story and tells him that Silpha beat the shit out of him for being so weak when they went out to train. Lloyd apologizes for coming late and returns things to normal before showing him the awful knife he got from his dungeon raid. To reveal the enchantments made on the sword, Lloyd boils some water and dips the knife into the hot water. Then, he gently scrapes the surface of the metal and reveals the incantations a former mage put on the knife. Upon revealing the incantations, Lloyd does some further analysis and realizes that the enchantments had already been treated with mana essence. As for the definition, Lloyd calls mana essence a catalyst that helps the user of a particular weapon to cast the spells easily. He dips the enchantment cards into a reagent and shakes it vigorously. Then, through a chemical reaction, the mana from the enchantment cards oozes out into the reagent and dissolves in it. To separate the minerals that make up the mana essence, Lloyd uses some advanced magic spell that forces the individual elements into their separate parts. After analyzing the resulting components further, Lloyd and his cute goat demon thingy find out that the mana essence is made from a material called hematite, silver, and oil. Silver and oil seem pretty easy to get, but as for hematite, Lloyd knows it's hard to get something like that. He thinks about his chances and decides that he's going to get the hematite from the dungeon. With this, he rushes to his father and borrows a bag of silver coins from him. Being the richest man in the kingdom, the king gives his seventh son the bag of silver, and Lloyd takes them all to his secret lair to melt. While Grim takes care of that operation, Lloyd rushes back to Silpha to train with her and get some oil. The bet was to train so hard that he landed a hit on her. Only then can he get the oil he's been after. Sypha doesn't go easy on him, as well as she makes sure to fight him seriously. Lloyd tries using magic to cheat again, but this time, Silpha sees it coming and hides under one of the magic earth huts he made. Then, when he wasn't looking, she beat him at his own game and gave him the gourd of oil she had with her. Even though he lost their match, she was still happy to see her trainee to be back in his element. Grim eavesdrops on their conversation and curses the terrible maid for being too hard on him. Lloyd thanks his teacher for the help and rushes back to his secret lair. Getting there, he joins Grim to continue decocting his mana essence by mixing and matching whatever he can find. Then, when he's done, he finally leaves the essence to rest while he rushes outside to discuss with his big brother Albert. On getting to his brother's quarters, Lloyd asks him to help him with as many weapons as he can so that he can test his enchantment magic on them. Hearing this, Albert gets very excited at his little brother's request. He politely orders his boys to drop their swords for science, and they do this reluctantly. Although the success rate of such a spell is less than 10%, Albert was still curious to see what Albert could do. After donating their swords for science, the guards grumble and murmur over the possibility of their swords getting destroyed in the process. Grim gets very mad at the guards for donating their swords so easily. After getting all the swords he could find, Lloyd takes them to his quarters and starts writing the incantations on them with his mana essence. While some of the swords broke after being unable to withstand the essence and complexity of the incantations, others stood the test of time and became much stronger than their base form. With Grim's help cheering him up, Lloyd ends up using up all the swords as he makes a few more enchanted swords. The next day, he submits 50 enchanted swords to his big brother. This meant that out of 120 swords that he collected from them, only 80 were successful. However, he still needed about 30 of those swords for further tests, so he only returned 50. Albert and his guards were a little surprised at the turnover time and quality of the enchantments, but then again, not many of them believed Lloyd could do it. Silpha was pretty pissed off at her trainee for going behind her back to do such a dangerous experiment, but the others didn't give a damn about them. One of the guards there tries to sheath his sword, only to realize that it's sliced off its sheath. Albert, on the other hand, checks out the sword his brother gave him and thinks about using it on his next mission. Lloyd politely asks him if he can see the swords in action soon, and his brother invites him over to join him on the next monster hunt mission his father just gave him. Lloyd is super excited to hear this from his big brother as he prepares his mental strength to follow his brother on his journey.